Welcome, dear friends, to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient wisdom meets peaceful slumber, and where every tale carries you gently toward dreams. I'm your storyteller tonight, and I'm honored to share with you a journey that spans centuries and continents, a story that unfolds like silk in the evening breeze. Here at Mystic Bedtime Stories, we believe that the most profound rest comes when we connect with the timeless tales that have shaped our world. Tonight, we travel together to a land where empires rose from desert winds, where tolerance was carved in stone long before it became a modern ideal, and where the echoes of ancient wisdom still whisper across the sands. Take a moment now to settle into your most comfortable position. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed, your pillow cradling your head like a cloud. Let your breathing slow and deepen, inhaling peace, exhaling the tensions of your day. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and allow my voice to become your guide on this gentle journey through time. Tonight we venture to the heart of ancient Persia, to a time when the world was younger and vast empires could rise from the dreams of a single visionary. You are safe here, in this moment, in this space where story and sleep intertwine like morning mist over mountain valleys. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast plateau, where rolling hills meet endless skies painted in shades of amber and gold. The air is warm but not harsh, carrying with it the scent of wild herbs and distant cedar forests. This is the Iranian plateau 25 centuries ago, when it was known to the world as Persia, the land of the sun worshippers, the land of dreams made manifest. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the ancient landscape. In the distance you can see the silhouettes of nomadic tents dotting the countryside, their cooking fires beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. These are not yet the people of a great empire. They are shepherds and horsemen, weavers and metal workers, living in harmony with the rhythm of seasons and the whispered promises of their gods. But even in this peaceful moment, something stirs, and the evening air. It's the breath of destiny, the first gentle stirring of winds that will soon reshape the known world. For in this land of mountains and deserts, of fertile valleys and star-filled nights, a story is about to unfold that will echo through millennia. You can feel it in the settling dusk, can't you? The sense that great things are stirring just beyond the horizon. Not the harsh clatter of conquest, but something softer, more profound. A vision of unity that will bring together peoples from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Indus River, not through force alone, but through an idea that was revolutionary for its time, that different peoples, different beliefs, different ways of life could coexist under one vast, protective sky. As darkness gently embraces the plateau, the first stars appear, the same stars that guided the ancient Persian kings, the same constellations that watched over caravans carrying silk and spices along roads that connected worlds. Tonight, these stars will guide us too, back through the mists of time to witness the birth of something extraordinary. Let your mind drift now, like a leaf on a warm evening breeze, back to a time when the world was full of wonders yet to be, discovered when empires existed only in the dreams of shepherds' sons, and when tolerance and mercy were about to become the foundations of the greatest empire the world had yet seen. We begin our story not with the clash of armies or the thunder of conquest, but with the gentle persistence of wind and water shaping stone with the patient work of generations learning to turn wilderness into civilization, and with the quiet strength of a people who would soon teach the world that greatness comes not from crushing your enemies, but from embracing them. Rest. Now, dear listener, as we prepare to witness the slow, majestic rise of Persia, let the peace of this ancient evening settle over you like a soft blanket, and prepare to dream alongside the dreamers who built bridges between worlds, who carved messages of hope in stone, and who showed us that even the mightiest empires are, in the end, simply stories told by one generation to the next. The night is young, the stars are bright, and our journey into the heart of ancient Persia is just beginning. Now, as the last light fades from the western sky, we find ourselves walking softly across this ancient plateau, our footsteps silent on earth that has witnessed the rise and fall of countless generations. The air grows cooler now, carrying with it stories older than memory, whispers of a people who emerged from the marriage of desert and mountain, of sky and stone. The Persians were not born as empire builders. They were not raised in palaces or trained from birth to rule the world. They began, as all great peoples do, with something far more precious than gold or conquest. They began with wisdom learned from the land itself, with strength drawn from adversity, and with dreams that grew slowly, like desert flowers after rare and precious rain. Listen closely, and you can almost hear them now, these ancient Persian tribes, as they move their flocks along well-worn paths between summer and winter pastures, the sound of bells on goat necks mixing with the soft conversation of families who have traveled these routes for generations. These are the Aryan peoples, cousins to those who would one day build civilizations in India and Europe, but for now they are simply wanderers following the ancient rhythms of the seasons. Picture them in your mind's eye, tall, graceful people with sun-darkened skin and eyes that reflect the vast skies under which they live. The men wear simple robes that flow like water in the desert wind, their beards carefully tended, their hands strong from years of working with horses and sheep. The women move with quiet dignity, their hair covered with cloth that catches the starlight, their jewelry speaking of connections to distant lands and ancient trades. These early Persians were not a single tribe, but a tapestry woven from many threads. There were the Medes, proud mountain dwellers who had learned to work iron and build cities of sun-dried brick. There were the Persians proper, masters of the high plateau, who understood the secret language of horses and could read weather patterns in the flight of birds. And there were dozens of smaller clans, each with their own customs, their own gods, their own stories of where they came from and where they were going. What united them was not conquest, but something deeper, a shared understanding of how to live in harmony with a land that could be both generous and harsh. They learned to follow water, to read the stars, to know which winds brought rain and which brought sandstorms. They learned that survival came not from fighting the land, but from listening to it, from becoming part of its ancient rhythms. In the evenings, when the day's journey was done and the fires were lit, the elders would tell stories. Stories of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord who created light and truth. Stories of the eternal struggle between good and evil, between the forces that build and those that destroy. Stories of heroes who chose the path of righteousness, not because it was easy, but because it was right. These were not simple people, despite their nomadic lives. They were philosophers and poets, metal workers, and astronomers. They could work gold into intricate patterns that told stories without words. They could breed horses that seemed to fly across the desert floor. They could navigate by stars and predict the weather by watching the behavior of animals. Most importantly, they were learning something that would one day make them great. They were learning that different peoples could live side by side without destroying each other. As they moved along their seasonal routes, they encountered other tribes, other ways of life. Sometimes there was conflict, yes, but more often there was trade, intermarriage, the slow blending of customs and ideas that would eventually become the Persian genius for governing diverse peoples. In their tents at night, Persian children learned not just the stories of their own ancestors, but tales borrowed from Egyptian traders, songs adapted from Mesopotamian merchants, wisdom gleaned from Indian mystics who had traveled the Silk routes. They were becoming, without knowing it, citizens of a world that did not yet exist, inheritors of a vision that had not yet been born. The land itself was teaching them patience. In the desert you cannot hurry. Water comes when it comes, not when you demand it. Plants grow in their own time, following seasons that cannot be rushed. Animals follow paths laid down by their ancestors, paths that honor the wisdom of countless generations. The Persians learned to think not in months or years, but in decades and centuries, to plan not just for themselves, but for children not yet born. This patience, this long view, would one day become their greatest strength as rulers. But now, in these quiet centuries before empire, it was simply the rhythm of life, the natural way of people who had learned to listen before they spoke, to observe before they acted, to understand before they judged. As you drift deeper into sleep tonight, let yourself imagine the peace of those ancient evenings. Picture yourself sitting beside a Persian campfire, watching sparks rise toward stars that have names in languages now forgotten. Feel the desert cooling around you. Hear the soft murmur of voices sharing the day's small adventures, the gentle sound of horses settling for the night, the whisper of wind through tent ropes that connect these wandering people to the infinite sky above. The great empire is still centuries away. The famous kings are not yet born. The golden cities are still dreams in the minds of unborn architects. For now there is only this, the eternal rhythm of seasons, the patient wisdom of a people learning to read the language of the earth, and the slow, quiet gathering of all the elements that will one day transform the world. Sleep now, as the ancient Persians slept, under stars that have watched over dreamers since time began, trusting in the gentle current of time that carries all stories toward their destined shore. In the gentle darkness of this ancient night, a new star begins to rise on the horizon of history. Not a star of fire and destruction, but one that shines with the steady light of wisdom and compassion. His name was Cyrus, and though he would become known as the Great, his greatness lay not in the cities he destroyed, but in the hearts he won, not in the enemies he crushed, but in the friends he made from those who had once stood against him. Let yourself drift back to a time when the world was smaller, when empires were measured not in continents, but in river valleys, when a young Persian prince looked out from his mountain stronghold and dared to dream of something that had never been attempted before, an empire built not on fear, but on respect, not on uniformity, but on the beautiful diversity of human. ways of living and believing. Cyrus was born into a world of constant conflict, where tribes raided tribes, where kings rose and fell like desert storms, where mercy was seen as weakness and tolerance was viewed as folly. But from his earliest years, something in Cyrus was different. Perhaps it was the influence of his Zoroastrian faith, with its emphasis on truth and righteousness. Perhaps it was the wisdom of his Persian ancestors, who had learned to survive in harsh lands by cooperation rather than conquest. Or perhaps it was simply the gift of a soul that could see beyond the horizon of his own time and glimpse possibilities that others had never imagined. Picture the young Cyrus as he begins his remarkable journey. The year is around 559 BCE, and he has just become king of a small Persian kingdom called Anshan. His realm is modest, his resources limited, his enemies numerous and powerful. To the north lies the mighty Median Empire, ruled by his own grandfather Astyages, a king grown cruel and suspicious with age. To the west lies Lydia, famous for its wealth and its invention of coined money. To the south and east lie the ancient powers of Babylon and Egypt, civilizations older than memory, rich beyond imagination. Any reasonable ruler would have been content to defend his small kingdom, to tend his flocks and vineyards in peace. But Cyrus possessed something more valuable than gold or armies. He possessed a vision of what the world could become if someone had the courage to try something entirely new. The first test of this vision came when his grandfather Astyages, fearful of a prophecy that his grandson would overthrow him, marched south with a great army to destroy the upstart Persian king. It was a moment that could have ended everything before it began, but Cyrus understood something that his grandfather did not. An army is only as strong as the loyalty of its soldiers, and loyalty cannot be commanded, only earned. As the two armies faced each other across a dusty plain, Cyrus did something unprecedented. Instead of preparing for battle, he sent messengers not to his grandfather, but to the Median soldiers themselves. His message was simple but revolutionary. I do not come to destroy, but to unite. I do not seek to rule over you, but to rule with you. Join me, and together we will build something greater than either of our peoples has ever known alone. The response was swift and decisive. The Median army, weary of their king's cruelty and inspired by Cyrus's vision of unity, turned against Astyages and delivered him to his grandson. But here, Cyrus performed the first of many acts that would define his reign and earn him a place in history unlike any other conqueror. Instead of executing his grandfather, as custom and prudence demanded, Cyrus treated him with honor and respect, providing for his comfort for the rest of his days. This single act of mercy echoed across the ancient world like a bell struck in a silent cathedral. Here was a conqueror who conquered not to destroy but to preserve, who won battles not through superior force but through superior humanity. Word spread along the trade routes and caravan paths. A new kind of king had arisen in Persia, one who kept his word, who protected the weak, who honored the gods of all peoples. With Media now part of his growing realm, Cyrus turned his attention to Lydia and its famously wealthy king, Croesus. The riches of Lydia were legendary. Gold from the river Pactolus flowing into royal treasuries, coins stamped with the images of lions and bulls circulating throughout the known world. Croesus, confident in his wealth and his alliances, prepared for war against this upstart Persian king. But once again, Cyrus chose an unexpected path. Even as he prepared for battle, he sent ambassadors to Croesus with an offer that stunned the Pos. "Ancient world, surrender your independence, and I will make you governor of your own land. Your people will keep their customs, their language, their gods. Your wealth will remain your own, asked only to contribute to the defense and prosperity of our united realm." Croesus, perhaps blinded by pride or unable to believe such an offer, could be genuine, chose to fight. The battle was brief but decisive, and Croesus found himself a prisoner, expecting the death that every defeated king knew awaited him. Instead, Cyrus made him a trusted adviser, and Lydia became not a conquered territory, but a willing partner in the growing Persian experiment. The greatest test, however, came with Babylon, that ancient mother of cities, seat of kings for over a millennium, home to the famous hanging gardens and the towering ziggurats that seemed to touch the very heavens. Babylon was more than a city. It was a symbol of human civilization itself, the place where writing had been invented, where laws were first codified, where astronomers had mapped the movements of the stars. But Babylon's king Nabonidus had grown, neglectful of his duties, more interested in archaeological expeditions than in governing, leaving the city's defense to his son Belshazzar. The people of Babylon, proud of their ancient heritage, found themselves increasingly oppressed and their temples neglected. When Cyrus approached the great city, he came not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He sent word ahead, "I come to restore what has been neglected, to honor what has been forgotten, to protect what has been endangered." And when the gates of Babylon opened before him without a battle, it was not because of fear, but because of hope. What Cyrus did next would be remembered for thousands of years. Instead of looting the city's temples, he restored them. Instead of enslaving the population, he freed those who had been unjustly imprisoned. Instead of imposing Persian customs, he honored Babylonian traditions. And most remarkably of all, he issued a decree that would echo through history. All the peoples who had been forcibly relocated to Babylon could return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This decree, preserved on a clay cylinder that still exists today, allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem after 50 years of captivity. But it was more than that. It was the first charter of human rights in recorded history, a document that proclaimed that all peoples had the right to their own beliefs, their own customs, their own ways of worship. As you settle deeper into peaceful sleep tonight, let yourself imagine the joy of those freed peoples, the tears of gratitude in the eyes of families reunited with their ancestral homes, the sound of hammers and chisels as ancient temples were rebuilt with Persian support. Picture Cyrus himself, not as a remote conqueror on a golden throne, but as a shepherd of peoples, a protector of the weak, a builder of bridges between different worlds. In just 29 years of rule, Cyrus had created something that had never existed before, an empire that grew stronger through diversity, that found unity not in uniformity but in mutual respect, that conquered not to destroy but to preserve and protect. He had shown the world that it was possible to be both powerful and merciful, both victorious and virtuous. When Cyrus died in 530 BCE, fighting to protect his empire's borders against nomadic invaders, He left behind more than just territory and treasure. He left behind an idea, a vision of what human governance could be at its very best. He had proven that empires need not be built on the bones of the conquered, that greatness could be measured not in the fear one inspired, but in the love one earned. Rest now in the gentle glow of this ancient wisdom, knowing that somewhere in the turning of history's great wheel, there have always been those who chose kindness over cruelty, understanding over ignorance, unity over division. Let Cyrus's example be your guide into peaceful dreams, where empires are built not of stone and steel, but of compassion and hope. Time flows like honey in the desert sun, and as we continue our gentle journey through the corridors of history, we find ourselves witnessing something extraordinary, the transformation of a collection of tribes into the largest empire the world had ever known. But this growth came not with the violent thunder of conquest alone, but with the steady, patient rhythm of a people who understood that true strength lies not in destroying what came before, but in embracing and protecting it. Let your breathing slow as we drift forward through the decades following Cyrus's great work. Picture the empire as it spreads like morning light across the ancient world, not harsh and blinding, but warm and welcoming, touching lands that had never known such gentle governance. From the snow-capped peaks of the Hindu Kush to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, from the cedar forests of Lebanon to the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, the Persian eagle cast its protective shadow over a mosaic of peoples, languages, and dreams. The genius of the Achaemenid system was not in its military might, though that was considerable, but in its revolutionary approach to empire itself. Where other conquerors had sought to remake the world in their own image, the Persians chose a different path. They became the first empire builders to understand that diversity was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be celebrated and preserved. Imagine yourself as a traveler in this vast realm, moving along the great roads that connected distant corners of the known world. As you journey from province to province, you witness something that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Egyptians maintaining their ancient temples while serving Persian governors, Babylonians continuing their astronomical observations under Persian protection, Greeks in the Western territories practicing their philosophy while contributing to Persian administration. This was the marvel of the satrap system, a form of governance so elegant in its simplicity that it would influence empire building for centuries to come. Each province, each satrap, was governed by a Persian noble who served as the great king's representative. But these governors ruled with a light touch. Local customs were preserved, local languages were honored, local gods were respected. The only requirements were loyalty to the empire, payment of taxes, and provision of soldiers when needed for defense. Picture the great king himself, sitting in his palace at Susa or Persepolis, receiving reports from across his vast domain. Scrolls arrived daily, carried by the remarkable postal system that Cyrus had established and his successors had perfected. News from India speaks of successful harvests and peaceful trade. Reports from Egypt tell of the Nile's annual flood and the contentment of the people. Messages from the western provinces describe the building of new cities and the flourishing of commerce. The wealth that flowed into the Persian treasury was staggering, but it was not hoarded like the gold of a dragon in some ancient tale. Instead, It was reinvested into the empire itself. Roads were built and maintained, connecting distant regions and facilitating trade. Irrigation systems were constructed, turning deserts into gardens. Cities were founded and fortified, becoming centers of learning and culture. The empire became a vast circulatory system, with wealth and goods, ideas, and innovations flowing freely from one end to the other. Consider the marvel of communication in this pre-digital age. The royal road, that great artery of empire, allowed a message to travel from Sardis to Susa in just 7 days, a journey that would have taken months for an ordinary traveler. Fresh horses waited at relay stations, and royal messengers rode, day and night, carrying the words of kings across vast distances with a speed that would not be matched again until the age of telegraphs. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this growing empire was its approach to religion and culture. In an age when most rulers demanded that their subjects worship their gods and follow their customs, the Persians took a different path. They became the protectors of diversity, the guardians of ancient traditions. In Babylon, they restored temples that had been neglected. In Egypt, they honored the pharaonic traditions. In Jerusalem, they enabled the Jewish exiles to return and rebuild their temple. This tolerance was not mere political expedience, though it certainly served practical purposes. It grew from the deep Persian understanding that the divine manifests itself in many forms, that truth can be found in many traditions, that the Creator's love extends to all peoples. The Zoroastrian teaching that all beings must choose between good and evil applied not just to Persians, but to all humanity, and the Persian kings saw themselves as champions of good for all their subjects, regardless of their origins. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, let yourself imagine the contentment of those who lived under this benevolent empire. Picture a Jewish family in Jerusalem, grateful to be home after generations of exile, rebuilding their temple with Persian support. Envision Egyptian priests continuing their ancient rituals, their sacred texts copied and preserved in Persian-sponsored libraries. Think of Greek philosophers in Asia Minor, their schools flourishing under Persian protection, their ideas spreading along Persian trade routes to distant lands. The Achaemenid Empire had become something unprecedented, a world government that ruled not through oppression but through respect, not through uniformity but through unity and diversity. It was an empire that made the world larger and smaller at the same time, larger in its scope and ambitions, smaller in the way it brought distant peoples together in mutual understanding and cooperation. Sleep now in the peace of this ancient golden age, when the known world was united under rulers who understood that true strength comes not from the sword but from the heart, not from fear but from respect, not from conquest but from the patient work of building bridges between the many different ways that human beings have learned to honor the divine mystery of existence. Time flows like honey in the desert sun, and as we continue our gentle journey through the corridors of history, we find ourselves witnessing something extraordinary, the transformation of a collection of tribes into the largest empire the world had ever known. But this growth came not with the violent thunder of conquest alone, but with the steady, patient rhythm of a people who understood that true strength lies not in destroying what came before, but in embracing and protecting it. Let your breathing slow as we drift forward through the decades following Cyrus's great work. Picture the empire as it spreads like morning light across the ancient world, not harsh and blinding, but warm and welcoming, touching lands that had never known such gentle governance. From the snow-capped peaks of the Hindu Kush to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, from the cedar forests of Lebanon to the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, the Persian eagle cast its protective shadow over a mosaic of peoples, languages, and dreams. The genius of the Achaemenid system was not in its military might, though that was considerable, but in its revolutionary approach to empire itself. Where other conquerors had sought to remake the world in their own image, the Persians chose a different path. They became the first empire builders to understand that diversity was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be celebrated and preserved. Imagine yourself as a traveler in this vast realm, moving along the great roads that connected distant corners of the known world. As you journey from province to province, you witness something that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Egyptians maintaining their ancient temples while serving Persian governors, Babylonians continuing their astronomical observations. Under Persian protection, Greeks in the western territories practicing their philosophy while contributing to Persian administration. This was the marvel of the satrap system, a form of governance so elegant in its simplicity that it would influence empire building for centuries to come. Each province, each satrap, was governed by a Persian noble who served as the great king's representative, but these governors ruled with a light touch. Local customs were preserved, local languages were honored, local gods were respected. The only requirements were loyalty to the empire, payment of taxes, and provision of soldiers when needed for defense. Picture the great king himself, sitting in his palace at Susa or Persepolis, receiving reports from across his vast domain. Scrolls arrived daily, carried by the remarkable postal system that Cyrus had established and his successors had perfected. News from India speaks of successful harvests and peaceful trade. Reports from Egypt tell of the Nile's annual flood and the contentment of the people. Messages from the western provinces describe the building of new cities and the flourishing of commerce. The wealth that flowed into the Persian treasury was staggering, but it was not hoarded like the gold of a dragon in some ancient tale. Instead, it was reinvested into the empire itself. Roads were built and maintained, connecting distant regions and facilitating trade. Irrigation systems were constructed, turning deserts into gardens. Cities were founded and fortified, becoming centers of learning and culture. The empire became a vast circulatory system, with wealth and goods, ideas, and innovations flowing freely from one end to the other. Consider the marvel of communication in this pre-digital age. The royal road, that great artery of empire, allowed a message to travel from Sardis to Susa in just 7 days, a journey that would have taken months for an ordinary traveler. Fresh horses waited at relay stations, and royal messengers rode, day and night, carrying the words of kings across vast distances with a speed that would not be matched again until the age of telegraphs. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this growing empire was its approach to religion and culture. In an age when most rulers demanded that their subjects worship their gods and follow their customs, the Persians took a different path. They became the protectors of diversity, the guardians of ancient traditions. In Babylon, they restored temples that had been neglected. In Egypt, they honored the pharaonic traditions. In Jerusalem, they enabled the Jewish exiles to return and rebuild their temple. This tolerance was not mere political expedience, though it certainly served practical purposes. It grew from the deep Persian understanding that the divine manifests itself in many forms, that truth can be found in many traditions, that the Creator's love extends to all peoples. The Zoroastrian teaching that all beings must choose between good and evil applied not just to Persians, but to all humanity, and the Persian kings saw themselves as champions of good for all their subjects, regardless of their origins. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, let yourself imagine the contentment of those who lived under this benevolent empire. Picture a Jewish family in Jerusalem, grateful to be home after generations of exile, rebuilding their temple with Persian support. Envision Egyptian priests continuing their ancient rituals, their sacred texts copied and preserved in Persian-sponsored libraries. Think of Greek philosophers in Asia Minor, their schools flourishing under Persian protection, their ideas spreading along Persian trade routes to distant lands. The Achaemenid Empire had become something unprecedented, a world government that ruled not through oppression, but through respect, not through uniformity, but through unity and diversity. It was an empire that made the world larger and smaller at the same time, larger in its scope and ambitions, smaller in the way it brought distant peoples together in mutual understanding and cooperation. Sleep now in the peace of this ancient, golden age when the known world was united under rulers who understood that true strength comes not from the sword, but from the heart, not from fear, but from respect, not from conquest, but from the patient work of building bridges between the many different ways that human beings have learned to honor the divine mystery of existence. Beyond the ceremonial splendor of Persepolis, across the vast expanse of the Persian Empire, there stretched something even more remarkable than palaces of stone. A network of roads that connected hearts and minds across impossible distances, carrying not just goods and armies, but ideas and dreams, letters and love, the very breath of civilization itself, from one end of the known world to the other. Let your imagination carry you now to the great royal road, that marvel of ancient engineering that began at Sardis in the west, where Greek traders brought their olive oil and wine, and ended at Susa in the east, where Persian nobles planned the governance of their vast realm. 2,500 kilometers of carefully maintained pathway, a lifeline of empire that pulsed with the constant movement of messengers, merchants, pilgrims, and dreamers. Picture yourself as a traveler setting out on this legendary route, your pack filled with letters to be delivered, your purse heavy with coins from a dozen different kingdoms, your heart light with the anticipation of what wonders await along the way. The morning air is crisp with the promise of adventure, and before you stretches a road that has been walked by kings and commoners, by soldiers and scholars, by lovers sending messages to distant beloveds, and merchants carrying news of harvests and festivals. The road itself is a marvel of practical engineering, wide enough for 2 carts to pass safely, paved with stone where the terrain demands it, carefully graded to avoid the steepest hills, following the natural contours of the land like a river following its ancient course. But more than its physical construction, It is the infrastructure of human connection that makes this road truly extraordinary. Every 25 kilometers, at exactly the distance a horse can travel at a steady pace without exhaustion, stands a posting station, a small oasis of civilization, where riders can exchange their tired mounts for fresh ones, where messages can be sorted and redirected, where travelers can find food, shelter, and news from the wider world. These stations hum with quiet activity, the gentle sounds of horses being tended, of grain being measured, of conversations in half a dozen languages, as people from different corners of the empire meet and share their stories. The most remarkable travelers on this road are the royal messengers, the elite corps of riders who carry the king's letters with a speed and reliability that would not be matched again until the invention of the telegraph. These men are chosen not just for their skill with horses, but for their absolute reliability, their incorruptible honesty, their ability to memorize complex messages in case the written versions are lost or damaged. They ride in all weather, through scorching heat and bitter cold, through sandstorms and thunderstorms, bound by an oath that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night will prevent them from completing their appointed rounds. Watch one of these messengers as he approaches a posting station at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat, dust covering his travel-worn robes. In his saddlebags are letters sealed with the royal seal, dispatches that might contain orders for the movement of armies, reports of harvests from distant provinces, or personal messages from the great king to his governors. He dismounts with practiced efficiency, transfers his precious cargo to fresh saddlebags, swings onto a rested horse, and thunders away into the morning light, already calculating the distance to the next station, the next exchange, the next step in the great relay that connects the heart of the empire to its furthest extremities. But the royal road carries more than official correspondence. It is also the great artery of commerce, the pathway along which flow the goods that make the empire prosperous. Caravans of camels and ox carts move steadily along its length, carrying silk from the east, spices from India, gold from Lydia, cedar wood from Lebanon, precious stones from the mountains of Afghanistan. The road becomes a river of wealth, but also a river of culture, as merchants from different lands share their knowledge, their techniques, their stories of distant places and different ways of life. At the caravanserai, those larger stations, where merchant caravans rest for the night, you can witness the miracle of Persian civilization in microcosm. Here, under the protection of the great king's peace, traders from Egypt bargain with merchants from Sogdiana, their different languages bridged by the universal language of commerce and mutual respect. Persian officials oversee the collection of taxes and the settling of disputes, but with a light touch that allows trade to flourish while maintaining order and justice. In the evening, as the day's journey ends and the cooking fires are lit, the caravanserai becomes a palace of stories. Travelers share news from their homelands, tell tales of the wonders they have seen, sing songs in languages that blend and harmonize like water finding its level. Children who have never seen the sea listen wide-eyed to stories of great ships and strange fish, while desert dwellers marvel at descriptions of snow-capped mountains and forests so thick that the sun never touches the ground. The letters that travel this road carry more than just official business. They carry the heartbeat of empire, the personal connections that bind distant peoples together, in bonds stronger than any military alliance. A Persian nobleman writes to his brother serving as satrap in Bactria, sharing news of their aging parents and the progress of the grape harvest. A Jewish merchant in Babylon sends instructions to his agent in Memphis, but also includes a scroll of prayers for the agent's sick child. A Greek philosopher in Sardis corresponds with a fellow scholar in Persepolis, debating questions of ethics and the nature of justice. These letters, written on parchment and papyrus, sealed with wax and carried with care across vast distances, become the threads that weave the empire together into a single tapestry of human connection. They carry love across the miles, friendship across cultural boundaries, knowledge across the artificial divisions that separate peoples. In an age without phones or internet, these letters are the social media of the ancient world, the way that hearts and minds stay connected across the vastness of space and time. The system is so efficient, so reliable, that it becomes almost invisible, like breathing or the beating of the heart. Messages sent from Susa reach Sardis in 7 days, a speed that will not be equaled again for over 2,000 years. Governors in distant provinces can consult with the central government on complex matters of policy. Merchants can coordinate their activities across thousands of miles. Families can maintain their bonds even when separated by the width of continents. As you settle into peaceful sleep tonight, let yourself imagine the quiet satisfaction of a message delivered, of a letter reaching its intended recipient after a journey of weeks and thousands of miles. Picture the joy of a wife receiving news that her husband's diplomatic mission has been successful, the relief of a merchant learning that his shipment has arrived safely, the excitement of a scholar receiving a response to a question that has puzzled him for months. The royal road and its network of messengers represent something profound about Persian civilization. The understanding that an empire is not just territory to be controlled, but a community to be nurtured, that true strength comes not from isolation, but from connection, not from division, but from the patient work of building bridges across the spaces that separate human hearts. Sleep now in the peace of knowing that somewhere in the great web of human connection, messages of love and hope are always traveling toward their destinations, carried by people who understand that the most important journeys are not those that conquer new territories, but those that bring distant hearts closer together. In the heart of the Persian Empire, where the sun first kissed the earth each morning, there lived a faith as old as the mountains themselves. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift back to those ancient days, when the first flames were lit in honor of the wise Lord, and the very air seemed to shimmer with divine presence. The Persians called their god Ahura Mazda, which means wise Lord in their ancient tongue. Picture, if you will, a deity of pure light and wisdom, dwelling in the highest heavens, surrounded by the eternal flame of truth. This was not a god born of human imagination, but one who had always existed, the creator of all that is good and pure in the world. Long before the great Persian kings ruled their vast empire, a prophet named Zoroaster had walked among the people. Some say he lived in the time when the world was young. Others place him in the mists of history, but all agree that his words changed everything. He spoke of a single, all-powerful God who had created the universe through thought alone, and who demanded not fear but righteousness from his followers. Imagine yourself standing in one of the sacred fire temples scattered across the Persian lands. The building itself is simple, perhaps a square room with 4 doors or a tower reaching toward the sky. But inside there burns a flame that has never been extinguished, tended by priests who have inherited this sacred duty from their fathers and grandfathers before them. The fire represents the divine to the Persians, a symbol of purity and truth that burns away all darkness. Some of these sacred flames have burned continuously for centuries, their light stretching back through generations of faithful guardians. The priests, dressed in white robes to symbolize purity, move quietly around the altar, adding fragrant wood to keep the flame alive, whispering prayers that have been spoken for 1,000 years. In this faith, the world is not a place of chaos, but a battleground between good and evil, light and darkness. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, represents all that is good, while his opposite, Ahriman, embodies destruction and lies. But this is not a hopeless struggle, for the Persians believe that good will ultimately triumph, and that each person has the power to choose which side they will serve. The beauty of this religion lies in its simplicity and its hope. There are no complex rituals, no sacrifices of animals or offerings of gold. Instead, the faithful are called to live by 3 simple principles: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Ashadrota, they would say, meaning truth is best. In a world often filled with deception and cruelty, this was a revolutionary idea. Water, too, was sacred to the Persians, as pure as the flame itself. Fire and water were considered agents of ritual purity, and the faithful would not pollute either element. They would not burn their dead, for that would defile the sacred fire, nor would they bury them in the earth, for that would contaminate the soil. Instead, they built towers of silence, where the bodies of the deceased were left for the birds of the sky, returning to the elements in a way that honored the purity of creation. Picture now a Persian nobleman, perhaps one of the great kings themselves, standing before the sacred fire at dawn. The flame dances before him, casting shadows that seem to move with a life of their own. He speaks no elaborate prayers, but simply opens his heart to Ahura Mazda, asking for wisdom to rule justly, for strength to protect the innocent, for the light of truth to guide his decisions. This was the faith that shaped the Persian Empire, that made them different from other conquerors of their time. The Achaemenid kings were worshippers of Ahura Mazda, and their royal inscriptions contain many references to the wise lord. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, he did not destroy the temples of other gods, but proclaimed that all people should be free to worship as they chose. This was not weakness, but the strength that comes from confidence in one's own faith. The Zoroastrian priests taught that every soul would one day face judgment, not from an angry God, but from their own conscience. At the end of time, they believed the world would be purified by fire and flood, and all the dead would rise again to live in a paradise where suffering was unknown. This was perhaps the first religion to speak of resurrection, of heaven and hell, of a final judgment that would separate the righteous from the wicked. As the Persian Empire spread across the known world, so too did these ideas. Jewish exiles in Babylon heard these teachings and carried them back to their homeland. Greek philosophers debated these concepts in their schools. The very words we use today, paradise and devil, come from the Persian language, gifts from this ancient faith that still echo in our modern world. In the evening, when the sun set behind the mountains of Persia, the faithful would gather in their homes and kindle small fires of their own. These were not grand ceremonies, but quiet moments of reflection, where families would speak of the day's events and consider how they had lived up to the ideals of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The children would listen as their elders told stories of the creation, of how Ahura Mazda had first conceived the world in his mind, then spoken it into existence with words of power. They learned that they, too, were part of this cosmic struggle between light and darkness, and that their choices mattered in ways they could barely imagine. Even now, in the quiet of this night, you can feel the presence of that ancient wisdom. The same stars that look down on Persian fire temples still shine above us, and the same human longings for meaning and purpose that drove those ancient believers still move in our hearts today. In the soft darkness of sleep, perhaps we can still hear the whispered prayers of the Zoroastrian priests, still see the sacred flames dancing in the night, still feel the peace that comes from knowing we are part of something greater than ourselves. The religion of light, as it came to be known, taught that every person carries a spark of the divine within them. This spark, this Fravashi or guardian spirit, connects us to the eternal flame of Ahura Mazda himself. As you drift toward sleep, imagine that spark glowing gently within you, a tiny flame that can never be extinguished, a light that will guide you through the darkness of night and into the brightness of a new dawn. Sleep now and let your dreams be filled with the wisdom of the ancients, with the gentle light of truth, and with the peaceful certainty that in the end all will be well. There comes a moment in every great empire when it encounters something it cannot simply absorb, cannot easily conquer, cannot bend to its will through diplomacy or overwhelming force. For the mighty Persian Empire, that moment came when it turned its gaze westward across the Aegean Sea toward the scattered city-states of Greece. Settle yourself comfortably now, and let your mind drift back to those ancient days when two very different worlds were about to collide. On one side stood Persia, vast and tolerant, ruled by god-kings who commanded millions of subjects across 3 continents. On the other side lay Greece, fractured and quarrelsome, a collection of small cities that could barely agree on anything, except their fierce love of independence. The trouble began, as so many troubles do, with a misunderstanding. The Greek cities along the western coast of Asia Minor, these prosperous trading ports that had lived under Persian rule for generations, suddenly decided they had had enough of paying tribute to the great king. Led by the city of Miletus, they rose in rebellion, calling upon their cousins across the sea for help. Athens, that proud city of artisans and philosophers, sent 20 ships. It seemed like such a small gesture at the time, hardly worth mentioning in the grand scope of Persian affairs. But when these Athenian ships helped burn the Persian provincial capital of Sardis, they sealed the fate of 2 civilizations. Picture King Darius I sitting in his magnificent palace at Persepolis when the news reached him. This was the man who had expanded the empire to its greatest extent, who ruled from India to the Mediterranean, who was accustomed to seeing rebellions crushed with swift efficiency. But this burning of Sardis was different. It was an insult, a challenge to Persian power that could not go unanswered. The Persian response was methodical, as always. First, they crushed the Ionian rebellion, city by city, with the patient thoroughness that had built their empire. But Darius did not forget the 20 Athenian ships. Legend tells us that he commanded a servant to whisper in his ear 3 times each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." And so began the great Persian expedition across the sea. Imagine the preparations. Tens of thousands of soldiers from every corner of the empire, Medes and Persians, Scythians and Indians, Phoenician sailors and Egyptian marines. They crossed the Aegean like a great wave, sweeping through the islands, accepting surrender from those wise enough to offer it, punishing those foolish enough to resist. The island of Naxos was burned. Eretria, which had also aided the Ionian revolt, was destroyed and its people carried off to slavery. And then in September of 490 BCE, the Persian fleet landed on the plain of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians faced an impossible choice. They could surrender and hope for mercy, or they could fight against odds that seemed hopeless. Their army was perhaps 10,000 strong. The Persian force was many times larger, battle-tested, equipped with cavalry and archers that had conquered half the known world, but the Athenians chose to fight. Under the command of a general named Miltiades, they marched out to meet the Persians on the plain of Marathon. Picture that moment, if you will. Greek farmers and craftsmen, citizens who had set aside their tools to take up spears, facing the might of the Persian Empire on a September morning 25 centuries ago. The battle itself was swift and decisive. The Greeks charged across the plain at a run, their bronze armor glinting in the sunlight, their shields locked together in an unbreakable wall. The Persians, accustomed to enemies who would waver under their arrow storms, found themselves facing men who would not break, who pushed forward even as their comrades fell by evening. The impossible had happened. The Persian army was broken, fleeing to their ships, leaving thousands of dead on the field. The Battle of Marathon was a watershed in the Greco-Persian wars, showing the Greeks that the Persians could be beaten. A runner named Phidippides carried the news back to Athens, gasping out, "Nike, victory!" before collapsing from exhaustion, giving us the marathon race that still honors his memory today. But the story did not end with Marathon. Darius died before he could launch another expedition, and the throne passed to his son Xerxes, a young king burning with the need to avenge his father's defeat and restore Persian honor. If Darius had been methodical, Xerxes was overwhelming. He would not merely defeat Greece. He would conquer it so thoroughly that no one would ever again dare to oppose Persian might. For years, Xerxes planned his great invasion, mustering an enormous army and navy. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed it numbered in the millions, though modern scholars believe it was smaller, perhaps 200,000 men. Still, it was the largest army the world had ever seen, drawn from every province of the empire, speaking dozens of languages, following hundreds of different customs, but all united under the banner of the great king. They came not just by sea this time, but by land as well, building a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, cutting a canal through the peninsula of Athos. The very earth and sea seemed to bend to Xerxes' will as his army marched through Thrace and into northern Greece, accepting submission from most cities in their path. But the Greeks were ready this time. Sparta, the warrior city that had not fought at Marathon, now took the lead in organizing resistance. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, where the road from north to south was squeezed between the mountains and the sea, they made their stand. King Leonidas of Sparta led the Greek force, perhaps 7,000 men in total, though history remembers best his 300 Spartan warriors. Picture them there in that narrow pass, these professional soldiers who had trained for war since childhood, their red cloaks bright against the gray stone, their bronze shields polished to mirror brightness. For 3 days they held the pass against the entire Persian army. Wave after wave of Persian troops broke against the Greek line like ocean waves against a rocky shore. Xerxes watched from his golden throne as his best soldiers, including his elite guard called the Immortals, failed to break through the narrow gateway to southern Greece. The end came through betrayal, as endings often do. A local Greek named Ephialtes showed the Persians a mountain path that led around the pass. Leonidas, learning that he was surrounded, dismissed most of his army, but chose to remain with his 300 Spartans and a few hundred others, knowing they would die, but determined to sell their lives dearly. They fought to the last man, and when their spears were broken, they fought with swords, and when their swords were shattered, they fought with their hands. A simple stone marker was later placed over their graves, bearing words that still echo across the centuries. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Yet even this heroic sacrifice seemed in vain. Xerxes' army poured south, burning Athens itself, forcing the population to flee to the island of Salamis. The Persian Empire appeared to have achieved its revenge at last, but appearances can deceive, and the war was far from over. In the narrow straits between Salamis and the mainland, the Greek fleet waited. And there, on a September day 10 years after Marathon, the tide of war would turn once more. But that is a story for another time, another chapter in this long tale of empires and dreams. As you rest here now, in the quiet of this peaceful night, remember those ancient warriors who faced impossible odds and chose to stand firm. Whether Persian or Greek, they were men like us, with fears and hopes and loves that mattered to them more than life itself. In their courage we see something eternal, something that speaks to the best part of human nature. The mountains of Thermopylae still stand, and the plain of Marathon still spreads green and peaceful under the Greek sun. The battles that once shook the world are now only whispers on the wind, but the memory of courage and sacrifice remains, as fresh as the day it was born, as enduring as the stars above us now. Sleep peacefully, and let your dreams carry you back to those ancient days when the fate of civilizations hung in the balance, and ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things. Sometimes fate arrives not as a distant thunder, but as a young man with golden hair and eyes full of impossible dreams. In the year 336 B.C., as the Persian Empire basked in what seemed like eternal stability, a 20-year-old prince named Alexander became king of a small mountainous country called Macedonia. Few in the Persian court at Persepolis would have paid much attention to this distant change of rulers. How could they have known that this young man would become the storm that would sweep away everything they had built? Let yourself drift back now to those final days of the great Persian Empire, when Darius III sat upon the throne that had been occupied by Cyrus, by Darius the Great, by Xerxes. He was not a weak king, this last Darius. By all accounts, he was intelligent, capable, and well-meaning. But he had inherited an empire that was already showing signs of strain, like a magnificent tapestry whose threads were beginning to loosen. After centuries of use, the Persian Empire in those days still stretched from Egypt to India, still commanded the loyalty of dozens of nations, still possessed wealth beyond imagining. The sacred fires of Zoroaster still burned in their temples. The great roads still carried merchants and messengers across vast distances, and Persepolis still stood in all its glory, its stone reliefs depicting the endless procession of tribute-bearers from every corner of the known world. But something had changed since the days of the great Persian victories. The empire had grown comfortable, perhaps even complacent. The warrior kings who had built it had been replaced by administrators who knew how to manage what they had inherited, but had forgotten the fierce energy that had created it in the first place. The satrapies were increasingly independent, their governors more concerned with their own power than with the unity of the empire. Into this world of ancient stability came Alexander, like a force of nature that recognizes no boundaries. He had learned warfare from his father Philip, but his dreams came from somewhere deeper, from the heroic tales of Achilles and the conquest stories that his tutor Aristotle had shared with him. At 22, he crossed the Hellespont with an army of perhaps 35,000 men, a force that seemed almost insignificant compared to the millions that the Persian Empire could theoretically command. The first great confrontation came at the Granicus River in 334 B.C. The Persian forces were commanded by local satraps who underestimated this young Macedonian king. They fought bravely, but they were thinking in terms of a local conflict, a border skirmish that could be resolved with a single battle. Alexander was thinking in terms of destiny, of conquering the world itself. The difference in vision, as much as any tactical superiority, determined the outcome. Picture that moment when news of the defeat at Granicus reached the Persian court. For the first time in generations, a significant Persian army had been completely destroyed by a foreign invader. But even then, few at court truly grasped what they were facing. This Alexander was young, they reasoned. He was far from home, with limited supplies and no clear line of retreat. Surely the vastness of the empire itself would swallow him up, as it had swallowed so many other conquerors over the centuries. The second great battle came at Issus in 333 B.C., and this time Darius himself took the field. Imagine the Persian king surrounded by the magnificence of his court, his golden chariot drawn by the finest horses in the empire, the immortals in their gleaming armor forming a wall of steel around him. Here was the living embodiment of Persian power, the earthly representative of Ahura Mazda, commanding an army that seemed to stretch to the horizon. But Alexander had studied Persian tactics, had learned from the battles at Marathon and Thermopylae. He struck at the heart of the Persian formation with his companion cavalry, those elite Macedonian horsemen who followed him with the devotion of brothers. The battle became a personal duel between two kings, two visions of what the world should be. And when Darius's chariot driver was killed by a Macedonian spear, when the great king himself was forced to abandon his chariot and flee on horseback, something irreplaceable was lost forever. Darius escaped from Issus, but he left behind his family, his treasure, and most importantly, his aura of invincibility. Alexander treated the captured Persian royal family with courtesy and respect, understanding that he was not just conquering an empire, but inheriting its responsibilities. This gesture of chivalry won him admirers even among his enemies, showing that he possessed not just military genius, but the wisdom to know when mercy was more powerful than violence. The final confrontation came at Gaugamela in 331 BC on a plain in what is now northern Iraq. Darius had chosen the battlefield carefully, a flat expanse where his superior numbers and his scythe chariots could be used to maximum advantage. He had assembled perhaps the largest army in Persian history, drawing warriors from every corner of the empire. Elephants from India, cavalry from Scythia, infantry from a dozen different nations. Alexander's army was vastly outnumbered, but it was also more cohesive, better trained, and led by a king who seemed to possess an almost supernatural understanding of the flow of battle. As dawn broke over the plain of Gaugamela, the two armies faced each other across a distance that would soon be closed by the thunder of hooves and the clash of bronze and iron. The battle itself was a masterpiece of tactical innovation. Alexander feinted to his right, drawing the Persian left wing out of position, then struck with devastating force at the gap that opened in their center. His companion cavalry cut through the Persian ranks like a sword through silk, heading straight for Darius himself. Once again the great king was forced to flee, leaving his army leaderless and his empire defenseless. With Darius's flight from Gaugamela, the Persian Empire effectively ceased to exist as an organized military force. The ancient capitals lay open to Alexander's advance. First Babylon, which surrendered without a fight, welcoming the young conqueror as a liberator rather than an enemy. The Babylonians had their own reasons for resentment against Persian rule, and they saw in Alexander a chance for renewal. Then came Susa, the administrative capital, with its vast treasuries and its records of empire stretching back centuries. Alexander found their wealth beyond imagination, enough gold and silver to finance his armies for decades to come. But more than wealth, he found the symbols of Persian power, the ceremonial robes of the great king, the golden throne from which Darius had ruled, the seals and regalia that represented the authority of empire. Finally, in the spring of 330 BC, Alexander arrived at Persepolis itself, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, the city that had been built to demonstrate the glory and permanence of Persian rule. For months, Alexander held court there, receiving the submission of Persian nobles, distributing rewards to his soldiers, trying to understand the enormous responsibility that victory had placed upon his young shoulders. And then, one night in May, Persepolis burned. Whether it was an accident born of drunken celebration or a deliberate act of revenge for the Persian burning of Athens a century and a half earlier, or perhaps Alexander's way of symbolically ending the old order to make way for the new, we will never know for certain. But as the flames consumed the great audience halls where Darius and Xerxes had received tribute from the nations of the world, an era that had lasted for 2 centuries came to an end. Darius III, the last great king of Persia, fled eastward into the remote provinces of his crumbling empire, hoping to gather support for one final stand. But his own satraps, seeing which way the wind was blowing, betrayed and murdered him as he slept, hoping to curry favor with the new master of the world. When Alexander found the body of his greatest enemy, he wept, ordering that Darius be buried with all the honors due to a king. And so ended the Achaemenid Empire, not with a last heroic stand, but with an act of treachery in the wilderness. The empire that Cyrus had built with vision and tolerance, that Darius had organized with wisdom and justice, that had endured for more than 2 centuries as the greatest power on earth, passed into history in a single generation. Alexander would try to continue the Persian tradition, adopting Persian customs, marrying Persian wives, attempting to blend East and West into a new kind of empire. But he was too young, too impatient, too much a creature of war to master the subtle arts of peace that had sustained Persian rule for so long. When he died in Babylon at the age of 32, his empire immediately broke apart, leaving only fragments and memories of what might have been. As you rest here now in the quiet peace of this gentle night, think about the strange workings of fate, how the actions of a single young man could bring down an empire that had seemed as permanent as the mountains themselves. The Persians had built something magnificent, a civilization that honored diversity and promoted trade, that connected East and West in ways that would not be seen again for centuries. Yet perhaps nothing truly ends, only transforms. The Persian legacy lived on in the customs Alexander adopted, in the administrative systems his successors inherited, in the roads and cities and ideas that continued to shape the world long after the last great king had fallen. In the end, the storm named Alexander may have destroyed the Persian Empire, but it could not destroy the Persian achievement, which remains with us still, whispering its ancient wisdom to those who know how to listen. Sleep peacefully now, and dream of ancient kings and distant battles, of empires that rose and fell like the waves of the sea, leaving behind only the eternal lessons of human ambition and the enduring hope that wisdom might yet triumph over mere force. There is a certain melancholy in endings, especially when they come not with thunder and lightning, but with the soft whisper of autumn leaves falling to earth. The great Persian Empire, which had once stretched from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Indus River, did not vanish in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it faded slowly, like a magnificent sunset that lingers long in the sky before finally giving way to night. Rest comfortably now, and let your mind wander back to those centuries after Alexander's conquest, when the world that Cyrus had built was broken into fragments, each piece trying to capture something of the glory that had once been whole. The young Macedonian conqueror had died in Babylon at the age of 32, his empire immediately torn apart by his generals, men who had dreamed of being kings but had never learned the art of being emperors. The largest portion of the old Persian lands fell to Seleucus, one of Alexander's most capable generals, who founded what historians would call the Seleucid Empire. Picture him, if you will, standing in the ruins of Persepolis, trying to understand how to rule a territory so vast that it would take a messenger months to cross from one end to the other. He was a Greek trained in the ways of Macedonia, but he found himself governing millions of people who spoke languages he had never heard, who worshipped gods whose names he could barely pronounce. The Seleucids tried, in their way, to continue the Persian tradition of tolerance and diversity. They built Greek cities throughout their realm, established trade routes that connected East and West, and maintained the old Persian system of satrapies. But something essential had been lost in the translation. The Persians had ruled through the quiet authority of ancient custom and divine mandate. The Greeks ruled through the more fragile bonds of personal loyalty and military might. By the end of the 3rd century B.C., the Seleucid power was already beginning to wane in the traditional Persian heartlands. Local governors grew increasingly independent, recognizing that the distant king in Antioch could not easily project his power across such enormous distances. The empire that had once been held together by the efficient Persian royal road and the authority of the great king began to fragment into smaller, more manageable pieces. In the northeast, a people called the Parthians began to assert their independence. They were nomads originally, Iranian in blood and culture, descendants of the same stock that had once followed Cyrus the Great. The Parthians challenged Seleucid hegemony through a series of conflicts that would ultimately expel the Seleucids from the Iranian plateau. But their victory was not dramatic or sudden. It was the slow, patient work of generations, like water wearing away stone. The Parthians understood something the Seleucids had missed, that Persia was not just a territory to be governed, but a culture to be preserved. They revived many of the old Persian customs, maintained the Zoroastrian fire temples, and presented themselves as the true heirs of the Achaemenid kings. The Parthian Empire would subsist for 5 centuries, longer than most Eastern empires, a testament to their understanding of the Persian spirit. Yet even the Parthians could not fully restore what had been lost. The unity that Cyrus had created, the sense of a single great purpose that had driven the Persian expansion, was gone forever. In its place arose a collection of smaller kingdoms and city-states, each claiming to represent the true Persian tradition, each jealous of its neighbors, each pursuing its own narrow interests. Imagine, if you will, a traveler in those days, journeying along the old royal road from Sardis to Susa, where once he would have encountered the efficient administration of the Persian Empire. Now he would find a patchwork of different rulers, different currencies, different languages. The road itself began to crumble, its maintenance neglected by kings who were more concerned with immediate threats than long-term infrastructure. Heavy taxes became more oppressive, leading to economic depression and revolts. The delicate balance that the Persian kings had maintained between central authority and local autonomy was upset. Without the moderating influence of the great king's court, local governors became petty tyrants, squeezing their subjects for tribute while providing less and less in return. The great cities of the Persian Empire began to decline. Persepolis, once the wonder of the world, stood empty except for the occasional ceremony. Its magnificent halls, where representatives from dozens of nations had once brought tribute to the great king, now echoed only with the footsteps of caretakers and the whispers of wind through abandoned corridors. Babylon, the ancient metropolis that had been the western capital of the Persian Empire, gradually lost its importance as trade routes shifted and new centers of power emerged. The hanging gardens, if they had ever truly existed, crumbled into legend. The great libraries and schools that had made Babylon a center of learning were neglected, their scholars dispersing to other cities, their knowledge scattered like seeds on the wind. Even the Zoroastrian faith, which had been the spiritual heart of the Persian Empire, began to fragment. Without the unifying presence of the great king as the earthly representative of Ahura Mazda, the religion split into competing schools and interpretations. Some fire temples were abandoned, their eternal flames finally extinguished after burning for centuries. Others were maintained by small communities of the faithful, but their influence on the broader culture continued to diminish. The Persian language itself began to change and evolve, influenced by Greek, Arabic, and other tongues. The elegant script that had once carried the decrees of the great king across 3 continents was gradually replaced by simpler, more practical writing systems. The Old Persian became the language of scholars and priests, no longer the common tongue of a living empire. This was not a conquest or a catastrophe, but something more subtle and perhaps more final, the slow erosion of a civilization. Like a great tree that has been struck by lightning, the Persian Empire continued to stand for centuries after Alexander's death, but its roots were damaged, its branches gradually withering, its leaves falling one by one until only the bare trunk remained. The end of the Parthian Empire came at last in 224 A.D., when the empire's organization had loosened, and the last king was defeated by one of the empire's vassal peoples, the Persians under the Sasanians. It was a fitting end in a way. The Persians themselves rose up to claim their ancient heritage, overthrowing the Parthians who had claimed to be their protectors. The Sasanians would attempt to restore the glory of the Achaemenid kings, to rebuild the Persian Empire in its original form. But they were working with the memory of greatness rather than greatness itself, trying to recreate something that had been unique to its time and place. Their empire would endure for centuries, but it would never again command the respect and admiration that the original Persian Empire had inspired. As you rest here in the quiet of this peaceful night, think about the lessons of this slow decline. Great empires, like great trees, do not usually fall in a single storm. They weaken gradually, losing their vitality so slowly that the change is almost imperceptible. The Persian Empire's true strength had never been in its armies or its wealth, but in its ability to unite diverse peoples under a common purpose, to create a sense of shared identity that transcended tribal and ethnic boundaries. When that unifying vision was lost, when the great king's court no longer served as the center of a vast, tolerant, cosmopolitan world, the empire began its long, slow fade into history. The Persians themselves would survive, their culture would endure, their contributions to human civilization would continue to influence the world for millennia to come. But the empire that Cyrus had built, that Darius had expanded, that had once been the greatest power on earth, had passed into the realm of memory and legend. Sleep now, and dream of those ancient days when the world was young and full of possibilities, when great kings ruled with wisdom and justice, when the future seemed as bright and limitless as the stars above. The empire may have faded, but its spirit lives on in every act of tolerance, every gesture of understanding, every attempt to build bridges between different peoples and cultures. In that sense, the Persian Empire never truly ended at all. There is a beautiful truth about great civilizations. They never truly die. Like seeds scattered by the wind, their finest achievements take root in distant soil, flowering in unexpected places, enriching the world in ways their creators could never have imagined. The Persian Empire may have faded from the pages of history, but its spirit lives on all around us, woven into the very fabric of our modern world in ways both profound and subtle. Settle back now and let your mind wander through the centuries that have passed since the last Persian king fell silent. Listen carefully, and you will hear the whispers of Persia echoing through time, speaking to us still in languages we use every day, in buildings we admire, in ideas we take for granted as part of human civilization. Let us begin with the words on your tongue, the very language you speak and hear each day. When you speak of a paradise, you are using a word that comes directly from the Persian paradisa, meaning an enclosed garden. The Persian kings created walled gardens of extraordinary beauty, places where flowers bloomed in perfect harmony and water flowed in geometric patterns that reflected the divine order of the universe. These earthly paradises were so magnificent that the word itself became synonymous with heaven, passing through Greek and Latin into English and dozens of other languages. When you encounter magic, you invoke the Persian magus, the wise priests who tended the sacred fires and studied the mysteries of existence. The magi, who followed a star to Bethlehem, were following in this ancient Persian tradition of seeking divine truth through careful observation of the natural world. Even today, when we speak of something as magical, we echo the Persian belief that the world is full of wonder and mystery, waiting to be understood by those with wisdom. To see the very word check, as in the game of chess, comes from the Persian shah, meaning king. Chess itself was refined in the Persian court, transformed from an ancient Indian game into the sophisticated intellectual exercise we know today. When you move a chess piece, you participate in a tradition that stretches back to Persian nobles, who saw in the game a reflection of the great strategies of empire and statecraft. But the Persian legacy extends far beyond mere words. Distinctive elements of Persian architecture can be found in different countries all around the Middle East. Even today, from the soaring minarets of Islamic mosques to the intricate tile work that adorns palaces and public buildings, the Persian love of geometric patterns, of gardens that bring order to nature, of buildings that seem to reach toward heaven while remaining firmly rooted in earth, continues to inspire architects and artists around the world. Walk through the gardens of southern Spain, and you will see the influence of Persian design in the fountains and courtyards of the Alhambra. Visit the great mosques of Isfahan or Istanbul, and you will witness the continuing evolution of Persian architectural principles. Even in modern cities like Dubai or Doha, contemporary architects draw inspiration from Persian traditions, creating buildings that honor the past while embracing the future. The Persian approach to governance, too, left its mark on human civilization. The concept of religious toleration, which the Persian kings practiced out of both practical necessity and genuine conviction, became one of the foundations of modern democratic thought. When the American founding fathers drafted the First Amendment, guaranteeing freedom of religion, they were building upon principles that Cyrus the Great had established 25 centuries earlier. The Persians were the first state, and they defined what it meant to be an empire, creating administrative systems that balanced central authority with local autonomy, that respected cultural diversity while maintaining political unity. Modern federal systems of government, from the United States to the European Union, still grapple with the same challenges that Persian administrators faced. how to govern vast territories inhabited by diverse peoples without destroying the very diversity that makes them strong. The Persian postal system, with its network of roads and relay stations, established the template for efficient long-distance communication that would be followed by every subsequent empire. When you send a letter or package today, when you track its progress across continents, you are benefiting from organizational principles first developed by Persian administrators who understood that information was the lifeblood of effective governance. In the realm of religion and philosophy, Persian influence runs even deeper. Zoroastrianism, the faith of the Persian kings, introduced concepts that would profoundly shape the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The idea of a final judgment, of resurrection from the dead, of a cosmic struggle between good and evil, all can be traced back to Persian religious thought. When Jesus spoke of heaven and hell, when Muhammad preached about the day of judgment, they were drawing upon a wellspring of spiritual insight that had first flowed from Persian sources. Even the scientific revolution of the medieval period owed much to Persian contributions. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, where scholars from around the known world gathered to translate and preserve the learning of antiquity, was built upon Persian foundations. Many of the greatest medieval thinkers, from Al-Ghazali to Omar Khayyam, wrote in Persian, contributing to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy in ways that laid the groundwork for the Renaissance and the modern scientific method. The Persian love of poetry and literature created a tradition that continues to inspire writers today. The works of Hafez, Rumi, and Fordafi are read and quoted around the world, their insights into love, loss, and the human condition as relevant today as they were centuries ago. When contemporary poets write about the mysteries of existence or the longing of the human heart, they often echo themes and images that first found expression in Persian verse. Finely decorated pre-Islamic structures still stand in several ancient cities, as do spectacular mosques and shrines from the Muslim era, testament to the enduring power of Persian artistic vision. These buildings, designated as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, continue to draw visitors from around the world, people who come not just to see ancient ruins but to experience something of the grandeur and beauty that the Persian Empire represented. Even in the modern nation of Iran, architectural and iconographic elements from the time of the Sasanian Persian Empire were reincorporated, linking the modern country with its ancient past. The Persian New Year, Nowruz, is still celebrated by millions of people across the Middle East and Central Asia, a spring festival that connects contemporary celebrants with their ancient ancestors who welcome the renewal of life after the darkness of winter. In the world of business and commerce, Persian innovations continue to influence global trade. The concept of credit, of complex financial instruments that allow merchants to conduct business across vast distances, was refined in Persian markets and trading centers. The Persian emphasis on honest dealing, on maintaining reputation as the foundation of commercial success, established principles that remain central to international business today. Perhaps most importantly, the Persian example demonstrates that it is possible for a great power to rule with wisdom and restraint, to build an empire based not on the suppression of differences, but on their celebration. In our modern world, where cultural conflicts seem to dominate the headlines, the Persian model offers hope that diversity and unity can coexist, that strength can come from inclusion rather than exclusion. The sacred fires that once burned in Zoroastrian temples still flicker in small communities around the world, tended by faithful descendants of the Persian Empire. These flames, some of which have burned continuously for over 1,000 years, serve as living links to the ancient past, reminders that some truths are timeless, some aspirations eternal. As you prepare to rest in the gentle embrace of sleep, remember that you carry within yourself something of the Persian legacy. Every time you show tolerance for someone different from yourself, every time you appreciate beauty in art or nature, every time you seek truth through patient inquiry rather than force, you honor the memory of Cyrus and Darius and all those who believed that human civilization could be something greater than mere survival. The Persian Empire may have ended long ago, but its greatest achievement lives on. The demonstration that human beings of different backgrounds, beliefs, and customs can live together in peace and prosperity, contributing their own unique gifts to the common good. In a world that often seems divided by fear and hatred, this ancient Persian wisdom offers a beacon of hope, a reminder that we are all part of the same human family, all children of the same earth, all inheritors of the same magnificent and mysterious universe. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that the best of the past lives on in the present, that the dreams of ancient kings continue to inspire modern dreamers, and that the echoes of Persia will continue to resonate through the halls of time as long as human beings cherish justice, beauty, and the endless possibility of becoming something better than they are. And so, dear traveler, our journey through the Persian sands comes to its gentle end. The stars above us now are the same stars that shone down on Cyrus as he dreamed of a just empire, the same stars that watched over Persepolis in its glory, the same stars that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But here's the beautiful secret that the desert knows. Nothing truly beautiful ever really ends. It just changes form, like water becoming mist, like seeds becoming flowers, like dreams becoming reality in unexpected ways. The great Persian Empire, with its marble columns and golden treasures, may have crumbled into dust. But the Persian spirit, the Persian vision of what human beings can create when they embrace both strength and gentleness, continues to live and breathe and inspire. In every garden where water flows in careful channels, Persia lives on. In every building where East meets West in harmonious design, Persia lives on. In every government that protects the rights of minorities, Persia lives on. In every poem that speaks of love transcending boundaries, Persia lives on. You carry this legacy within you now. You've walked the royal roads with the swift messengers of the king. You've stood in the shadow of the great pillars of Persepolis. You've felt the warmth of the sacred fires. You've learned the Persian secret, that the greatest empires are not built with sword and stone alone, but with wisdom and compassion, with beauty and justice, with the recognition that all human beings share the same sky, the same hopes, the same dreams. The desert wind grows quiet now, as if it has finished sharing its ancient stories. The sand beneath you feels warm and welcoming, like a bed prepared by caring hands. Above you, the Persian stars begin their slow dance across the velvet darkness. the same eternal dance they've performed since the world was young. Let yourself sink deeper into this peaceful darkness. Feel how the weight of centuries settles around you, not as a burden, but as a gentle blanket woven from all the dreams and hopes and love that human beings have poured into this world. You are part of this great tapestry now, connected to Cyrus, and Darius to the poets and the architects, to the merchants who traveled the Silk Road and the gardeners who planted the first roses in paradise. Your breathing slows and deepens, matching the ancient rhythm of the Persian prayers, the rhythm of the desert itself. In and out like the tide of history, like the cycle of empires rising and falling, like the eternal conversation between earth and sky. The last whisper of Persia comes to you now, soft as a mother's lullaby, wise as the words of the ancient kings. Do not fear the morning, for in every dawn lives the promise of paradise. Do not fear the ending, for every ending is also a beginning. The best of what we were lives on in what you are becoming. Sleep now, dear friend. Sleep peacefully in this ancient land where the sand holds memories like treasures, where the stars write stories of empires that live forever in the human heart. Dream of Persian gardens where the water sings, of Persian poetry that makes the soul dance, of Persian wisdom that lights the way forward. And know that when you wake, you will carry with you always this gift from the desert. The understanding that true greatness lies not in conquering others, but in the quiet courage to create beauty, to choose kindness, to build bridges instead of walls, to plant gardens instead of graveyards. The Persian Empire may have ended 23 centuries ago, but the Persian dream continues in you. Sleep well, keeper of dreams. Sleep well, guardian of beauty. Sleep well, inheritor of paradise. The desert whispers its final blessing. May your sleep be as peaceful as a Persian garden. May your dreams be as beautiful as Persian poetry. And may you wake with the wisdom of the ancient kings echoing gently in your heart. Sleep now. Sleep in the embrace of history. Sleep in the whisper of eternity. Sleep in the eternal echo of Persia.